Clearly, what you do not want in chess is to find yourself on the losing side of a beautiful chess miniature, and that is why it's important to know how to counter aggressive gambits. Today we're going to go over the Scotch game, pawn d4, one of those common and aggressive attempts of white. Now in this case, white attacks the center of the board, and as you capture, white then has a couple interesting and aggressive options. They can go for this drunk knight attack knight g5. Looks dubious, but in fact is very dangerous. Now, white also may just recapture a pawn with knight takes d4, which leads to the classical Scotch game, and finally white may opt for the Scotch Gambit, bishop c4, when white aims for quick development, and they have a number of aggressive options. They can throw their bishops out, they can jump with their knight out, the center is open, and therefore they have plenty of attacking opportunities. Now, if you're not familiar with these lines, it's very easy to go down within the next 5 moves, and that's why I do want to share with you the best and simple way for black to counter that. Let's start from the most dangerous variation that your opponents may choose to play. It's when they play d4, but after you recapture, all of a sudden they don't take the pawn back, but instead they go for this knight to g5 attack. There is no clear name for this gambit. In my previous video about this, you guys suggested the Haggis gambit, so let's use this idea here. And after knight g5, white bets on the fact that after h6, they're gonna sack the knight right here. You have to capture it. Now they play bishop c4, attacking your king, and they're mainly hoping for you to instinctively just return your king back to e8, because if you do so, then you're indeed cooked. After queen h5, this is nearly scholar's checkmate, and indeed black is going to be checkmated within the next couple moves, so that clearly is not how you play it. One of the nice and counterintuitive ways to counter this check is to play the bold, aggressive move king to g6. We're just marching forward with our king. And although that looks absurd at first, in fact you want to hide here on h7, and it's a really nice square for the king when you are perfectly safe. In most cases, your opponents will try to still check your king with queen g4, which in fact is actually wrong, because you are going to play there anyway, and in fact white only helps you to play the move you intended to play. Moreover, after that, if they keep trying to deliver these checks, in fact, again, they only help you to keep developing. You play g6, covering the king. Now the only check is queen f7, and of course that is almost a checkmate, but not really, because you've got bishop g7. And again, they're just playing this meaningless checks all over the place while you just keep developing your pieces and they achieve nothing. Moreover, in some variations, this queen can even be trapped. Just to show you what I mean, if white plays castles, for example, because they have no attacking moves anymore, let's say you develop the knight, and after whatever that they want to play here, you can jump with your knight to e5, and all of a sudden this queen is absolutely trapped. But even without this trap, you're just up a piece with a totally winning position anyway. Now let's move on to more solid attacking options of white, and the most dangerous one is bishop to c4, known as the Scotch Gambit. White aims to finalize their development quickly, and they have a couple of aggressive options in mind. Also, they postpone capturing this pawn for later, so that maybe they'll capture it on one of the next moves, or maybe they won't waste time, but instead will start targeting your king right away. Now, what are you going to do here? Well, it's actually quite tricky, because of course there are different ways to play here for black, but they're heavily theoretical, and there are a ton of variations that you gotta know, which I do not want for you. So I want to cut down the theory just to a single variation, and for that reason, I recommend that you play bishop b4 check, which is likely to confuse your opponents, because although it may seem like a very natural move to play, but in fact it's not. Like, the most natural moves, like the most common, or at least, are knight f6 and bishop c5, and bishop b4 is far less common. Therefore your opponents quite likely will not know anything about this move. Moreover, after bishop b4, since this is a check, your opponent must react, and therefore you limit the options that they could possibly have. Now, white is down a pawn, and they need to rush, they need to attack you. Otherwise, you will just finalize your development, castle, and you're good, you'll be enjoying your extra pawn. Therefore, they can't just casually develop their pieces, they need to attack. So they play c3 to block the check, as well as to attack your bishop. You take the pawn, they recapture, now the bishop is attacked, and it's important to retreat to a5, not to c5, because what's important is to keep your pieces defended. Now, this bishop on a5 is guarded by the knight. Although at first this may not seem like a big deal, but quite often they can just rush forward with something like queen to d5, and all of a sudden they attack right here and right here. And you see that the fact that your bishop is already defended with the knight is actually very handy. Now this attack is completely harmless. You can just defend and the queen will be attacked on the next move. So it makes sense to play your pieces to the squares where they are already defended, because then you reduce the chance of you blundering them any time later in the game. So bishop of a5. Now, in most cases, white's going to castle because still you put some pressure down to this pawn and potentially to the king. They can't move their knight, or else you'll grab their pawn, so they want to castle. And now that's again quite a tricky position because white has a number of attacking options and you still need to be very careful. What I recommend is to play another counterintuitive move, bishop b6. And there are two major reasons for this move. First of all, you keep everything like super rock solid. Now all these pieces are defended as hard as you possibly could do this, and there's no way on earth they can attack you. Plus, it also keeps your development flexible, because this knight can be developed to f6 or to e7 depending on what white plays now. For example, if they want to play a bishop g5 and attack you from this side, then there is no point in voluntarily pinning your knight. Instead, you want to play knight e7, because if you play it here, then indeed this pin is annoying, and they can push the pawn forward, you're in trouble. So instead, you just develop your knight to e7, and your position is once again super well defended, and there are no problems at all. You castle, you play d6, you develop your light square bishop, everything's great, you're up a pawn, life's good. Now let's put it back. Another attempt of white could be to develop the bishop from this side, and this time they aim to cut your king so that you can't castle short on the following moves. And then again, it doesn't make sense under these circumstances to develop your knight right here and allow them to execute their idea. Instead, it's still better to just block their bishop by putting your knight to e7. Now the bishop does not block your king anymore. You can castle safely, play d6, and again they have no attack, life's good. So as I told earlier, I wanted to give you the system that is simple, where you don't have to remember a lot of theory and it's like relatively straightforward to play it. Now let's go back. The final attempt that many of your opponents will try is knight g5, kind of like the fried liver attack. They threaten this pawn with their knight and bishop. But there is one difference with the fried liver attack. There is no pawn on e5. And you can actually take advantage of that and jump with your knight forward onto that square e5. And that's really cool because not only you guard this square f7, but also you counterattack their bishop, meaning they have to waste time to just defend or retreat their bishop. And as they do so, now their attack is over and you have time to do something. You could play h6 right away and just chase this knight back. That would be fine, but it's even stronger to play queen f6, and I'll show you why in a second. Now, you do want to play h6 on the next move. And it's not easy for white to attack. By the way, notice that the pawn on f2 is pinned by our bishop, therefore they can't play f4, which they would wish to play to attack your knight, but they can't because the pawn is pinned. For that reason, in most cases, they play king h1 to unpin the pawn, and now they're getting ready to play f4. But you play h6, attacking this knight. And now it becomes really unpleasant for white, because what can they do? Like, normally, they'd wish to retreat the knight back to f3, but now we see that our queen is helping us a lot. And knight f3 is actually bad for white because you just take there. And again, normally they'd wish to recapture with the queen, but now you would just trade queens off, open up their king. And again, let's not forget that we have an extra pawn. Therefore, for them, it doesn't make much sense to end their attack. And after queens come off the board, you're just up pawn with the winning position. That's why we wanted our queen to be here. Now they can't so easily retreat to f3. So let's take it back. The most played move by white here is actually a counter-attacking attempt f4. That looks actually pretty good at first, because it looks like, hey, you're attacking their knight, but they're attacking yours. So if you take here, they recapture, and now it looks like they actually put strong pressure onto you. That bishop is still alive and is still attacking you. Now that's also this counter-attack of the queen. Looks like if you move the queen away, they're going to take on f7, start checking your king, and that feels uncomfortable. But there is a really beautiful way to turn things around, and that is da-da-da-dum, rook takes h2. Clearly your opponent did not expect that. Now king takes, and all of a sudden you start attacking their king, although they was hoping obviously for the opposite. But now queen h6 check. Once again, let's not forget that we have our sniper bishop standing right there, and it's very important for our attack, which makes it forcing for white to actually go forward. Now you keep checking. Queen h4 check, king comes here to f3, and this is almost a checkmate, but not yet, because the king can escape back there to e2. And you need to bring a little bit more firepower to your attack, and you do this with a fancy move pawn to d5. That's the final move that wins the game on the spot. Now, thanks to this move pawn to d5, we create a number of threats. One is bishop g4, checkmate. The other one is queen g4, checkmate, again because it is supported by the bishop. And finally, you attack this pawn on e4. You can capture it with, let's say, queen takes e4. That's the third threat that you've got here. And white is simply defenseless. Like, whatever they do, you'll execute one of these threats. For example, if they just capture this pawn, here comes bishop g4, and that is a checkmate. Although it's really beautiful, I understand that somebody will write in comments that I can't memorize all these variations and all these opening traps never work for me anyway. Well, first of all, that's not an opening trap, that's actually quite a solid and good opening variation, but I'm actually with you on this. I agree that chess is a strategic game, and knowing openings is certainly not enough to really progress. It's just suitable for YouTube because it's short and practical for me to record these type of videos. But if you are really serious and you wish to accelerate your progress, I've put together a special bundle called Boost Your Elo to 2000, where I included everything that you need to get to that level. So you can just follow a proven roadmap, which has been tested by lots of other students, and you can achieve your chess goals faster. If you're interested, you can click the link below the video and check it out. I've also added a number of interesting bonuses for you as well, so check it out and see if you like it. Now we're approaching the most common and the most classical approach, where it simply recaptures the central pawn. And, before we move on any further, the very first thing that you should do here is that you should not take on d4. That is the most played move by black, and it's a big mistake. Now, for the real OGs, to take is a mistake, and generally speaking, you do not wish to release the tension when there is no specific reason for doing so. Now, you take there, you only help your opponent to activate their queen. Now they completely occupy the center. They're putting pressure down here, making it harder for you to develop your bishop. You can't bring your knight easily because they can easily attack it with their pawn. So overall, it's already quite tough for black, and you do not want to take on d4. Now, what you do want to do instead is play the same move, bishop b4. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to keep it very simple, so I wanted that you play the same move. Whether they play the Scotch Game or the Scotch Gambit, you throw out the same check, bishop b4, which again gets them out of the book. They don't know what to play here, which makes your life easier. Now, after a bishop b4 check, they'll usually cover attacking your bishop, and now you just slide back to c5, putting some pressure to this knight, although it's defended, but anyway, slightly unpleasant. Now, many of your opponents will see that the easiest solution is just to take on c6. Now, they do not know that to take is a mistake, so they're going to play this. Knight takes c6. Now, you recapture with the b pawn. There's a general rule that you should take towards the center, and also if you took with the d pawn, that would allow them to trade queens and force your king to move. So b takes c6 is better from any standpoint. Now they develop their bishop, somehow getting ready to castle, and here there's a surprising move. Queen h4. You're kind of looking for a scholar's checkmate, but the idea is deeper. Now, we capitalize on the fact that white does not have that knight on f3, which could attack your queen, and they don't even have this knight on g1. From there, it could possibly jump to f3 and attack your queen on the next move. So your queen on h4, although seemingly exposed, there is no real way for white to attack it effectively. Plus, right now, we're not only attacking this pawn, because we've got our bishop here as well, but we're also threatening this pawn on e4. Therefore, they definitely need to defend somehow. In most cases, they castle. They realize that it guards this pawn, and taking on e4 is not an option because they're going to play rook e1 and win your queen thanks to the spin. They're hoping for this, but we're not going to go there. In fact, we instead play knight f6, and we add one more attack to this pawn, but we also have something else in mind, which they're highly likely to overlook. Now, they'll see this attack, and in most cases, they just push the pawn forward, attacking your knight. I'm not really sure whether they realize that they're blundering this bishop, or it was a kind of lucky blunder when, even though you could take the bishop, but in fact they could still take your knight, and the situation remains to be complicated. Either way, we're not going to go there, because besides pressuring this pawn, which used to be on e4, knight f6 had one more purpose, which your opponent is very likely to overlook. It's knight to g4. And now they're done. So we just put too strong pressure on all these weaknesses with all of our pieces, and they're already defenseless. Now they get a counter queen h2 checkmate in threat. And if they play h3, then you take on f2 and you just attack everything. You attack the queen here. We've got this bishop, which makes it possible for all kinds of discover checks on the next move. Our queen is still attacking this bishop on c4, and we just attack really everything. We're going to grab something for sure on the next moves and probably get a winning material advantage. Going back a couple moves, if your opponent is smart enough or simply lucky enough not to play e5 here but play queen f3, which looks more solid because now you defend this pawn on e4, you also provide some more protection for your king side. Generally speaking, I'm speaking from the white perspective. There's another trick here which is really cool. It's the move pawn d5, and that attacks this pawn on e4, your opponent happily captures on d5, and if not, you're going to capture yourself, their own pawn on e4, and you still get winning advantage. Plus, you open up your bishop for all kinds of attacking moves, so it's pretty cool. And if they do capture on d5, once again, they overlook the fact that your queen from h4 not only tried to attack something here, but it also x-rays the bishop along the 4th rank, and you just grab this juicy bishop on c4, and also you get a winning material advantage. They can play this one check, but it's a single check. There's nothing dangerous. You can, let's say, just cover. Then this pawn is hanging, and still you just enjoy an extra piece. If they take, the easiest is to play bishop e6. Everything is super well defended. Then you castle. Life's good. You have a winning material advantage. You may be thinking, Igor, you're overhyping this opening for black. It can't be all that bad. White can't be losing all the time. Of course, there is also a good way for white. Now, here's this. We're still in the main line. We play this bishop b4 check. They cover in most cases if they want to be aggressive. You go back bishop c5, and now, since they feel some pressure to this knight, the main line is bishop e3, which at first glance just overprotects this knight on d4, but there is also a hidden trap, and you got to be really careful. If you play any careless move, something like knight f6, that actually is a losing error, because this bishop e3 x-rays your bishop on c5. And remember, we talked about this earlier. Whenever you have a hanging piece, a piece which is not defended by your other pieces, there is always a risk of some tactical troubles. And here white has knight c6, attack of your queen, but at the same time, it's a discovered attack of this bishop. And they're going to win your bishop on the next move. You lose the game. You did not want that. Therefore, let's take it back, which means that after bishop e3, when they x-ray your bishop, you just need to bring it back to b6. We saw this pattern in one of the previous variations where you keep everything rock solid, no chance for you to blunder anything. On a side note, if your opponent starts taking right here, what are you going to do? Like, there is again this general rule that you want to take towards the center. So if you take here, you've got a choice between taking with a d pawn or b pawn. You want to take towards the center. And same thing right here. If they take on b6, you've got a choice between these two moves. You still take towards the center. By this pawn, that also opens up your rook, and everything's great. If white doesn't try to trade off as much as they can and just develop, you do the same. You also develop. You play knight f6, that also attacks this pawn, by the way, and you're getting ready to castle. Therefore, after they guard this pawn somehow, you then castle. And now you just enjoy a simple, normal, standard game of chess. After, let's say, they castle, there are a number of things that you can do. For example, you can play rook e8 and attack this pawn for the second time. On the next move, after white defends it somehow, you usually have a choice between a more modest move, pawn to d6, just trying to complete your development, or a more aggressive move, pawn to d5, right? Which is usually a better option. Here, not only you getting ready to develop your bishop, but you're attacking him. You're attacking the bishop, you're attacking this pawn. By the way, our rook also kind of puts pressure down here, so it's already kind of annoying. And although theoretically that is still about equal, white needs to be very careful. For example, they take, you recapture with a knight, you're still creating a lot of threats here. You're putting pressure here. If they take on d5, you recapture. Still, you're attacking the bishop. And if the bishop just goes, they're going to lose the pawn after this exchange, because we attack this knight 3 times, and he guards it twice. Means that at the end of the exchange will be a pawn up. And if he tries, let's say, something like knight e4, just to cover up everything, that actually is a blunder, because after f5, this knight is attacked, but it can't go away, because if it does, then they're going to drop the bishop on e3, and here you just win the game. That just goes to show that although the position objectively is about equal, you're still putting a little bit of pressure on him, and if he's a little bit careless, it's easy for him to go down. Now you know how to handle the Scotch game as well as the Scotch Gambit as black, but guess what? Most of your opponents don't, which makes it a great opening choice for white, whether you choose to play the Scotch Gambit or even that Haggis Gambit variation knight g5. They both are actually very dangerous, especially against an unprepared opponent, and especially if you're below 1600. Therefore, I would recommend that you actually consider playing this as white, and I've got a video about this. You can check it out right there, and maybe you'll enjoy it and we'll start playing this. If you're also more ambitious and you want to speed up your chess progress and get to the level of 2000, once again, you can check out my Booster Elo to 2000 bundle by clicking the link up there or somewhere below in the description. And either way, keep crushing it.